History has always been a fascinating tapestry of human ingenuity, culture and evolution. Yet woven into this tapestry are threads of cruelty and suffering that reveal the darker side of our past. One such chapter exists in the Middle Ages, a period often romanticised for its knights, castles and chivalric codes, but also infamous for its harsh justice systems and brutal methods of punishment. In this video here on HistoryTube, we'll delve into the macabre world of medieval torture, a realm where pain was not just a consequence but a carefully orchestrated tool. Torture served many purposes during this time. It was a method of punishment, a way to enforce laws, a means of extracting confessions, and a weapon of fear wielded by those in power. Whether someone was accused of heresy, witchcraft, treason, or even petty crimes, they may find themselves subjected to methods of suffering that seem unthinkable by today's standards. Medieval torture was not only about the infliction of pain, it was often as much about public spectacle and societal control. Many of these punishments were carried out in the full view of the townsfolk, a grim reminder to all who watched of the consequences of stepping out of line. From the infamous racks that stretched bodies to their breaking point, to devices designed to mock as much as they maimed, these tools of torture carried not only physical agony, but also psychological terror. But what drove societies to adopt such extreme measures? How did religion, politics and social hierarchies fuel the development and justification of these methods? Were these techniques purely tools of justice, or were they expressions of the darkest instincts of human nature? As we explore these questions, we'll also examine the paradox of this era, a time of great culture and intellectual achievements overshadowed by acts of unspeakable cruelty. It's essential to approach this topic with care. While the grim realities of medieval torture can be shocking, they can also offer us valuable insights into the human condition. They remind us of the dangers of unchecked power and the lengths to which fear can drive people. So prepare yourselves as we journey into a chilling chapter of history, a chapter where the suffering was methodical, justice was brutal, and humanity's capacity for cruelty was on full display. It's not just a look at the past, it's a reflection on the shadows that can exist within us all. So, before we step forward and look at the top 10 most excruciating torture methods known to man, it would be amiss of me not to ask you the favour of subscribing to the HistoryTube. Don't worry, if you fail to do so, you won't be racked. However, we really would appreciate it. The rack. The rack was one of the most infamous and perhaps most feared torture devices of the medieval period. Designed to extract confessions, punish heretics, or intimidate opponents, it embodied the brutality of the Middle Ages. Utilised in the Tower of London, the device itself consisted of a wooden frame with rollers at each end. The victim's ankles and wrists were tied to those rollers, and a mechanism was used to gradually stretch the body. As the torturer turned the crank or the wheel, the ropes pulled the victim's limbs in opposite directions, creating excruciating pain. Muscles tore, joints dislocated, and bones often fractured under the strain. The agony inflicted was so severe that it frequently compelled victims to confess. Whether the accusations were true or fabricated, who knew? The rack became particularly associated with inquisitions, where it was used to force confessions of heresy. While primarily employed by the state and church authorities, it also symbolised the broader use of fear as a tool for control during this period. Though it's been long since relegated to history, the rack serves as a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty. Its legacy reflects both the lengths to which societies have gone to maintain order and the resilience of those who suffered under such brutal regimes. The Scavenger's Daughter. As a brutal counterpart to the rack, the scavenger's daughter was a gruesome torture device employed during the Middle Ages and designed to inflict excruciating pain by compressing the human body. Invented in the 16th century by Sir Leonard Skeffington, Lieutenant of the Tower of London, its purpose was to extract confessions, punish prisoners, and enforce compliance, particularly among those accused of treason or heresy. Unlike the rack, which stretched the body, the scavenger's daughter worked in reverse. The device consisted of a metal frame or hoop that forced the victim into a crouched fetal position. The head, hands and feet were bound together tightly, placing immense pressure on the chest and abdomen. Blood circulation was severely restricted, leading to bursting blood vessels, intense cramps, and suffocation-like sensations. The psychological torment was as severe as the physical agony, with many prisoners confessing simply to escape its relentless grip. The device was often employed in the Tower of London and became synonymous with a Tudor-era style cruelty. Though less infamous than the rack, the scavenger's daughter was no less effective in demonstrating the lengths authorities would go to suppress dissent. Today it serves as a chilling reminder of the medieval interrogation methods and the extremes of human suffering they inflicted. The Iron Maiden. Although its historical use is debated, the Iron Maiden remains a legendary symbol of medieval cruelty. This horrifying apparatus combined a physical agony with psychological terror, embodying the brutal justice of the era. The Iron Maiden was a tall coffin-like structure made of iron or wood, with its interior lined with sharp spikes. The victim was placed inside and the door was closed, causing the spikes to pierce the body. These spikes were deliberately positioned to puncture non-vital areas such as arms, legs and shoulders, ensuring prolonged suffering rather than instant death. Blood loss, infection and unbearable pain would torment the victim, often driving them to confess or repent. While legends of its use are widespread, historians argue that the Iron Maiden may have been a later invention, retroactively attributed to the medieval period. Regardless, its association with the Middle Ages symbolises the era's reputation for cruelty and inventive methods of punishment. Whether as a genuine instrument of torture or a product of dark imaginations, the Iron Maiden remains a potent reminder of humanity's capacity for inflicting pain and the underlying struggle for justice and power in the medieval society. The thumbscrew. This small but agonising device was used to crush fingers or toes. It didn't discriminate. The screw mechanism allowed torturers to exert precise pressure, breaking bones and causing unbearable pain. It was a portable tool, popular across Europe and used for both interrogation and punishment. The small and portable nature of this device meant it was a favourite tool for extracting confessions, punishing prisoners or coercing information. The mechanism of the thumbscrew consisted of two flat metal bars connected by a solitary screw. The victim's thumbs or fingers were placed between the bars and the screw was tightened gradually. As the bars pressed together, the bones fractured, joints dislocated, and soft tissue was destroyed, causing unbearable pain. Sometimes variations of the device targeted larger areas such as the feet, or applied spikes to pierce the flesh during compression. Thumbscrews were particularly associated with interrogations during inquisitions and witch trials, where their use demonstrated both cruelty and efficiency. Unlike larger devices like the rack or the Iron Maiden, thumbscrews allowed torturers to focus on specific body parts, intensifying the psychological torment by drawing out the pain in increments. Though small in size, the thumbscrews were a symbol of medieval ingenuity in inflicting suffering. Today they stand as a grim reminder of an era where human rights were non-existent and physical agony was wielded as a tool of control and fear. The Pear of Anguish. The Pear of Anguish is a notorious medieval torture device, infamous for its grotesque design and application. Though its historical use is debated, the device is said to have been employed to punish and torment victims during the Middle Ages. The Pear of Anguish was a metal device shaped as you would expect like a pear, consisting of segmented petals that could expand when a screw at the base was turned. The device was inserted by the torturer wherever he should see fit in order to extract the confession he was seeking. Once in place, the screw was tightened, causing the petals to expand, tearing and rupturing tissue and inflicting unimaginable pain. This torturer's tool was often used against heretics, blasphemers, and those accused of sexual crimes such as adultery or homosexuality. Beyond the physical agony, the psychological horror of its use heightened the suffering. The injuries inflicted were often severe and could result in lasting disfigurement or death from infection. Whether genuinely used or exaggerated by later accounts, the Pear of Anguish epitomises the cruelty of medieval torture methods. It symbolises the extremes to which authorities would go to punish dissent and enforce societal norms through fear and pain. The breaking wheel. This torturous device became so notorious that its name lives on today. It's still used as the name of a very popular firework, the Catherine wheel. The breaking wheel was one of the most brutal execution and torture devices of the Middle Ages. It was designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation upon its victims, often reserved for those accused of the most heinous crimes such as murder, treason, or robbery. The device consisted of a large wooden wheel with radial spokes. The condemned person was tied to the wheel either spread-eagled or with the limbs positioned over the spokes. The executioner would then use an iron rod or hammer to shatter the victim's bones, starting with the legs and arms, ensuring a slow and agonizing death. The body would be left twisted around the wheel, and in some cases the victim was left to die of exposure or shock, which could take days. To add to the suffering, the wheel was sometimes displayed atop a pole as a warning to others, with the mangled corpse visible to everyone. This gruesome spectacle reinforced the authority of the law through fear. The breaking wheel's continued legacy is a stark reminder of the extreme cruelty of medieval justice systems, where torture and public executions were used not just to punish, but to terrify and to control the masses. The Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle, sometimes referred to as the Judas Cradle or the Judas Chair, is often described as a torture device from the medieval era. Its design is simple yet sinister. A triangular pointed seat mounted on a sturdy base, often attached to ropes or mechanisms in order to adjust the height and angle. Victims would be stripped and lowered onto the sharp point of the cradle, with the tip pressing against or into their body, usually in extremely sensitive areas. The idea was to inflict unbearable pain, humiliate the victim, and extract confessions or enforce obedience. The cradle's operation relied on the principle of weight distribution. The victim's own body weight created their own pain. Sometimes additional weights were tied to their legs to increase the agony. The process was slow and agonizing, designed not to kill immediately but to prolong suffering. Though its reputation is notorious, historical records about the Judas Cradle's actual use are sparse. It's often associated with the Spanish Inquisition, a period infamous for its brutal interrogation methods. However, It's crucial to note that many of the most grisly medieval torture devices we hear about today, including the Judah cradle, are only sparsely documented in reliable medieval sources. Some historians suggest that these devices were exaggerated or even fabricated during later periods, such as the 18th and 19th century, when anti-Catholic sentiment was high and the Inquisition became a symbol of unchecked brutality. Nevertheless, torture itself was commonplace during the medieval period. The Judah cradle, whether widely used or not, reflects the broader mindset of the time, one that saw physical suffering as an acceptable means to extract confessions or enforce social and religious conformity. The church and state wielded such methods to maintain power, control heresy, and silence dissent. It's worth noting that devices like the Judah cradle were as much about psychological terror as they were about physical pain. The mere threat of such punishment often coerced individuals into submission. In modern times, a Judah cradle has taken on a life of its own in popular culture, appearing in movies, novels, and even some museums. Whether or not it was a staple of medieval torture chambers, its grim design remains a powerful symbol of the lengths to which authorities went to enforce order during one of history's most turbulent periods. The Iron Spider. The Iron Spider, also known as the Breast Ripper, was a torture device designed specifically for women. This gruesome instrument was most often used as a form of punishment for crimes considered female in nature, such as adultery, heresy, blasphemy, or even accusations of witchcraft. The device itself was deceptively simple. It consisted of a metal claw or pincers, sometimes heated, that were designed to mutilate a woman's breast. In its most common form, the breast ripper featured sharp, claw-like ends that could be manually forced onto a woman's body. Once secured, the torturer would pull, tearing flesh. Some variations of the device were mounted on walls or chains, and in some instances the claws were heated to intensify the pain. The Iron Spider was not designed to kill immediately, but to maim, humiliate, and cause unbearable suffering. The physical injuries were often fatal over time due to blood loss or infection, but the psychological trauma was equally devastating. The device was particularly horrifying because it targeted a part of the body symbolically tied to femininity and motherhood. This made it not just a physical punishment, but also a tool of societal control. By inflicting such specific and graphic harm, authorities aimed to intimidate women and enforce strict social and moral codes. Historically, the Iron Spider was most associated with the European witch trials and other medieval justice systems that disproportionately targeted women. The Inquisition in particular saw the use of many such devices to extract confessions or serve as punishment. However, like many medieval torture devices, direct evidence of its use is limited, and much of what we know about it today comes from 18th and 19th century accounts that sometimes exaggerated the cruelty of earlier periods for dramatic effect. Rat torture. Rat torture is one of the most harrowing examples of creative cruelty. The concept revolves around using live rats, creatures already feared by many, and weaponizing their natural instinct to gnaw and burrow. While different variations of rat torture have appeared across history, one of the most infamous methods involves trapping a rat in a confined space and pressed against the victim's body, often with no escape but through the flesh of the victim. A typical setup involved a metal container such as a bucket or cage that was placed open side down on the victim's stomach or chest. Inside the container, live rats would be introduced. To coerce the rats to burrow downwards, torturers would apply heat to the container, creating an unbearable environment for the animals. The terrified and desperate rats, driven by survival instincts, would frantically attempt to escape, often clawing, gnawing and digging into the victim's skin to find a way out. The resulting injuries were excruciating, and the psychological terror of feeling the rat's movements again added another layer of torment. This method of torture is often attributed to certain periods and regimes notorious for their brutality, including medieval Europe, ancient Rome, and even more modern instances such as during the Dutch Revolt in the 16th century. In the Roman Empire, records suggest that Empire Dominican used rats to execute political enemies. Later, during the Dutch Revolt, a similar practice is said to have been used to intimidate and punish those accused of betrayal or dissent. However, it's important to separate fact from legend. Rat torture has taken on a somewhat mythical status, and while historical references exist, much of what we know about it today may well be amplified by popular culture. Modern depictions such as in George Orwell's 1984 or TV series like Game of Thrones have immortalised this grisly practice, often blending historical truth with creative license. What made rat torture particularly horrifying is its psychological element. Unlike mechanical torture devices, this method relied on living creatures, which made the experience more unpredictable and terrifying. The fear of rats themselves added an additional layer of dread, as victims would anticipate not only physical pain, but also the visceral horror of being attacked by vermin. Water torture. Water torture refers to a range of techniques involving water to inflict psychological and physical pain. While the term waterboarding might be more familiar today, medieval methods were often brutal and inhumane, designed to break both body and spirit. One of the simplest forms of water torture was the slow, deliberate act of forcing prisoners to swallow excessive amounts of water, known as forced water ingestion. This technique caused extreme bloating and internal pain, often leading to vomiting or asphyxiation. It wasn't just painful, it was terrifying. Another infamous variant was drip torture. The victim was restrained, and water was allowed to drip steadily onto their forehead, sometimes for hours or even days. The monotony and discomfort of each drop could drive the victim into madness. Lastly, there were cases where prisoners were submerged in freezing water or held under for long enough to create a sense of drowning, only to be pulled back at the brink of unconsciousness. Water torture was employed for several reasons. It was cheap, requiring nothing more than water and a bit of ingenuity. It left no visible marks on the body, making it the preferred method during periods like the Inquisition, where confessions were needed without obvious evidence of coercion. This technique wasn't just about extracting information, it was about instilling fear. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical pain. Though medieval water torture methods may seem like a relic of the distant past, echoes of these practices have persisted through history. Techniques such as waterboarding, used in modern interrogation, are direct descendants of these medieval methods. This grim continuity forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about ethics and human rights, both in the past and today. Water torture is a haunting reminder of how ingenuity can be twisted into cruelty. It's a chapter in history that showcases the darker side of human innovation. As we study these methods, we not only learn about the past, but also reflect on how far or how little we've progressed. What drove society to adopt such extreme measures? To understand why societies adopted such extreme measures like the rack or water torture, we must delve into the complex interplay of religion, politics, and social hierarchies that defined the medieval era. These forces didn't just justify such methods, they actively fueled their development. In medieval Europe, religion was a central pillar of life. The Catholic Church wielded immense power, not only over spiritual matters but also over governance and law. During the Inquisition, heresy was considered a grave threat, not just to faith but to the stability of society itself. Torture became a tool to extract confessions, rooting out dissent, and ensuring adherence to religious orthodoxy. It was seen as a necessary evil to save souls, even if the body suffered. Torture also served political ends. Rulers used it to silence rivals, uncover conspiracies, and maintain control over their territories. Accusations of treason, rebellion or sorcery were often met with extreme interrogation. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about sending a clear message to potential dissenters. Defy authority and you will suffer. Medieval societies were deeply hierarchical. Torture was disproportionately inflicted on the powerless, peasants, the poor, and women accused of witchcraft. It reinforced the dominance of the elite, reminding the lower classes of their vulnerability and their place in social order. Together, these forces created a culture where cruelty became a means of control, justified by the belief that it preserved divine and earthly order. And there you have it, 10 of the most notorious and chilling methods of torture used during the Middle Ages. These brutal techniques are a stark reminder of a time when power, fear and control shaped society in terrifying ways. If you found this deep dive into medieval history intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories from the past. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring history's darkest corners.